kind of first impact or feedback that we got was we actually lost our biggest client at the time, which, to be, again, fully transparent, was about, I think, 80% of our revenue.
All right, this episode is about entrepreneurship and growth. However, Stefanie, let's get real for a minute. There's all these buzzwords, right? We talk about leadership development. We talk about high growth. We talk about investing in all of these different things. And there's tons of buzzwords out there. However, I think oftentimes we miss and don't talk about enough the failures and all of the hard, mucky stuff that it takes for the success, right? So when we think about growing and scaling a company and all of the things that people don't want to talk about, you don't want to share it because it could be a failure. It shows a lack of intelligence or confidence or whatever. Let's be transparent, right? One of our core values of iCopy, we're coming clean, being transparent of the nitty gritty, dirt of hard stuff.
Love it. I love that. Well, so some of you might know from our backstory that our product Nimbus is something that we have built from start to finish, from concept design, the tech, the front end, the back end, everything is something that we've built internally with our tech team. And if anybody out there has built an app or built a software before, you know that it's something that you put your blood, sweat, and tears into, like, every iteration of it, because one, you think it's got to be the best thing in the world before you get it out to market. And then when you finally get it out to market, you just hold your breath and wait to see what happens. And so our path to that particular product going live for the first time was, like anything else, had a ton of ups and downs to it. But when we finally launched it, I think in August 2019, we launched it, and the first impact or feedback that we got was we actually lost our biggest client at the time, which, to be, again, fully transparent, was about, I think, 80% of our revenue. And so imagine the feeling of the amount of time, money, effort, everything that was invested into this product. We get it out there, excited, and essentially the kinks in it were just too much for that client to want to put up with. I mean, they just weren't in the space where they needed to be or wanted to be a guinea pig. And that's essentially what we needed at the time. And so I think that was something that I remember feeling like, wow, like, is this really not going to work? Like, did we screw something up? Yeah, we broke it. But what I think is really important, and what I think anybody, whether you're in a startup or you're just launching anything, like you might have a company and you're looking at, starting a new product or a new line of business or whatever that looks like. The only way you find out if it's sellable is if you put it out there. And the only way you know if people like it is if you actually put it out there. And so while that was probably one of the scarier times in the initial outset of like, well, what do we do now? We have a product that's not really clicking, and we now just lost a bunch of revenue. Like, where do we go from here? I think it was one of the most pivotal parts of what got us to this point, because if we'd have just kept it in and not put it out there, who knows how long it would have taken to get feedback and how much more we would have lost time and money-wise.
Yeah, and I think there's an important component of, if someone has heard the history of iCopy before, that we were really a service-based company, purely, taking orders via phone and email and very direct, and then had this opportunity to switch to tech-enabled. So this product, Nimbus, ultimately laying on top of that for clients that had never experienced the tech-enabled service. Change is hard, right? That change management is really hard. And so understanding, I think for anyone, when you're doing something new within a service or just business line that you're running for existing clients, that change management, you're going to roll the dice on if you're going to keep them, if you're going to lose them, and ultimately the opportunity cost, right? I love that so much.
I've noticed that there's whether it's a change or just a new thing in general, the way that you increase your odds of success with a new product is how much you help the client understand how to do it upfront. So not just like how the product works, but like quite literally hand-holding the first steps of like, this is how this is going to work, and we're going to do it for you.
Yeah.
And then with you, and then kind of put you on that path, where I think that a lot of times when specifically in the tech world, when we have a new app or software, it might do all these things once they're in there. But if the gap between the user actually logging in and using it and doing all of the benefits, like getting access to all the benefits it has, if they can't get to that point, then there's a huge gap. So actually walking through and going and sitting through that process of making it as easy for them as possible to adopt is really important. Again, whether it's a change or just a brand new thing in general.
Yeah. So let's talk another failure aspect, right?
Sure.
Something that was just really broken or went terribly wrong. Is there anything that comes to mind for you?
I think that one of the things that I struggled with before really bringing you on into the fold was understanding how to manage the people side of things. And I think you alluded to this at the beginning, but I think where before we had kind of your expertise from a layer of operations and kind of systems, I think there was some kind of legacy assumptions around what people needed to be in what positions at what times for what level of business, basically. And so I remember I went through a period of hiring for kind of a specific role that now we handle completely differently and a completely different function, completely different set of skills, really. And I was hiring people that I was almost trying to force them into a box. Like I was like, oh, you might work for this. And it ended in like terror. I mean, that I had to have some pretty difficult conversations and admit like, well, maybe I made the wrong call on hiring that person. And kind of like going through that process of realizing if you want to start, like if you want to be a good leader, one of the primary things is figuring out who the right people in the right seats are. And before I was able to bring you into that conversation, I was kind of just throwing stuff against the wall and hoping it would stick. And so, and it wasn't sticking. So that was another, a big, I guess, failure that I could think of from the early days that I wasn't getting right at first.
Well, and I think to hopefully make you feel a little bit better, even though I had, came in with different experience on the people management side of things and maybe training teams or figuring out how to onboard people into seats, we've experienced 3,000% growth in the last four years. And I had to learn too, right? So even though initially, I think at the beginning, there was probably an improvement from what had been, but then ultimately, I remember very distinctly feeling kind of like a crazy person at one point with my massive Post-it notes around a room, standing with like multicolored dry erase markers because we had just had this huge growth spurt, and I was having to take what we had in existence and reimagine the whole thing. And so I often try to share with other people who are either anticipating growth or really want growth, thinking about how it's an onion and you have to peel back the layers and ultimately you build something and you have to sometimes think about the foresight that it's going to break. It's going to fall apart. It's going to hit its ceiling, and you can't be afraid of that change and that destruction. We went from 11 staff to 20 staff. And this is like our stateside, because we have lots of layers of how our operations is handled. But that particular growth point, and it was 9 people needed hired in about 3 weeks in order to sustain kind of this change, right? So I reimagined it. And in order to reimagine it in such a way that would create a stronger foundation, and I made not great hiring decisions, right? Like that next growth spurt, you can interview all day long and failed in how I imagined it at that point and had to learn, unfortunately, with people in the seats and knowing that you do the best that you can and continuing to share your mission and your vision with the people who continue to stick with you throughout the team, and try to be transparent from the beginning so that those who come in and maybe don't stay, that still have that understanding of the heart. And it's not heartless. It's, there's that business aspect, but sometimes we just get it wrong.
Yeah.
And that's hard. Like, I just feel like us business people that have to have that, like, we need a support group because it's hard to let people go and feel like you've failed those individual people.
Well, I think a good reminder in any growth spurt for anybody is that the reminder of what's gotten you here is not going to take you there. And I think that a lot of people have a hard time just being loyal to a system even. It's not necessarily even to people, because it's obviously important to be loyal to people, but the idea of being loyal to legacy ideas and systems is something that I think traps a lot of people, because just because it worked to a certain point doesn't mean that it's going to continue. And so I think getting comfortable with telling anybody like, hey, this worked till now, even sometimes it only works for a year. Sometimes it works for 6 months, but to recognize and be okay with the fact that, yes, this is going to be another inflection point, but it's one that is necessary because it takes you from A to B and then B to C and D. Like you have to keep being comfortable to making those transitions no matter when they come through.
And making them quickly,
Yeah.
which can turn into lost business, lost people, but understanding that the benefit once you get to the other side of that learning curve or of that change management is where you see success, right? In the shorter term, it might feel like failure. And I think also recognizing sooner rather than later that a change of management, a change of process doesn't mean that that previous one failed necessarily. There are things to be learned from it. And maybe that's a classic part of me as someone who like my root is fear of failure. So I'm like, nothing's a failure. That's just not true. There are definite things of failure. But so for those listening that, we're all in this struggle, how do you deal with fear and doubt?